You answered the call and took up a sword to save the land and the princess. You explored the ends of an unknown world and discovered its many secrets. You braved labyrinths, solved puzzles, fought off terrifying monsters, and through it all, fulfilled your destiny and became the hero of legend. So, now what? After the villain is defeated and the land is saved, what is the hero supposed to do? Does he settle down, marry the princess, help rebuild the land? Does he ride off into the sunset, never to be seen again? Or maybe the hero's work is not yet done. Maybe the forces that called the hero to action have still more they expect from him. Maybe another adventure is soon to come. The original Legend of Zelda received monumental success among critics and players alike, and it is still widely considered to be the best NES game ever made. Very early after its release, it was apparent that The Legend of Zelda would be incredibly popular, and that Nintendo had struck just about as much gold as its cartridge had implied. It's no surprise then that gamers wanted the opportunity to continue their adventures in Hyrule. They wouldn't have long to wait. Nintendo was already hard at work on a sequel, and the result was ready for release in Japan in January of 1987, 7 months before the original Zelda even made it to America. Once again, a sparkling gold cartridge greeted its players, but this time, it sparkled with the hopes and expectations of returning adventurers, ready to explore what would undoubtedly be a new world full of labyrinths, secrets, and puzzles. Well, what they got wasn't exactly what they had expected. As soon as you leave the title screen and begin inputting your name, you can't help but notice that your character sprite looks a little on the short side. No, that can't be what you're playing as. There's no way you'll be able to do everything you're supposed to do with a sprite that small. Tossing the thought aside, you put your name in and start your adventure. And then the other foot drops. Instead of the top-down view of the first game, you're immediately put into a side-scrolling room. Nothing actually happens in it, but the visual shock is enough to make you question whether or not you picked up the right game. As soon as you leave the room, you see your overworld and the tiny sprite you saw before, but it's already quite apparent that the larger side view is going to be your main character for the duration of this adventure. And you have no idea how you're going to cope with the change. It's true that the adventure of Link is kind of the black sheep of the Zelda family, and the side view is only the beginning of the differences. Even though you are still wandering around in a new world, the exploration aspect is very subdued in this game. Some areas are presented as a surprise, but most secret areas are very obviously labeled as caves or with other conspicuous markers. Most other events happen as random battles very similar to an RPG. Your usual set of interchangeable items is missing, replaced with a set of items that almost always work automatically. You do have some magic spells, but their use isn't so much for exploration as they are for making sure you don't die. Death itself is an odd event, with multiple lives in addition to your health, and your health is an anomaly in and of itself. You don't have heart containers anymore. Instead, you just have a meter like your magic meter. Even the music is different, and it's never seen anywhere else in the Zelda universe, though we have heard the dungeon theme in Super Smash Bros. It's perhaps fitting then that of all the Legend of Zelda titles, this is the only one that doesn't actually have The Legend of Zelda in its title. It's just Zelda 2. And yet, it's the only game that answers the question many gamers have asked over the years. Why is it called The Legend of Zelda when it's Link going on all the adventures, and Zelda is barely in it, if she's in it at all? Many generations before the events of The Legend of Zelda, Hyrule's king ruled with the help of the Triforce. When he died, the Triforce of Power and Wisdom was inherited by the king's son, but the Triforce of Courage mysteriously vanished. After extensive searching, the prince was informed by a magician close to the king that the king's daughter, the Princess Zelda, had been given information regarding the Triforce. When questioned, Zelda refused to talk, and the magician in anger cast a powerful sleeping spell upon her. Stricken with grief at what he had done, the prince laid Zelda in a palace in northern Hyrule in the hopes that she would one day awaken. That the tragedy would always be remembered the prince decreed that every girl born into the royal family was to be named Zelda from that time forward. This tale is told to Link by Impa when the mark of the Triforce suddenly appears on the back of Link's hand a few years after the events of the original Legend of Zelda. Kept with the sleeping Zelda was a collection of 6 crystals and a scroll written in an ancient language which Link is somehow able to read. He is informed that in order to retrieve the Triforce of Courage, hidden in the Valley of Death, the 6 crystals must be placed in palaces throughout Hyrule after defeating their respective guardians. The Triforce of Courage was needed in order to help Hyrule in its recovery from the destruction Ganon had left behind. His underlings were still running rampant in the land, fueled both by their general thirst for chaos and the belief that the death of Link would bring about the revival of their evil king. Thus, you set out on your journey set to deal with not just new dungeons and guardians, but creatures that are literally out for your blood. Needless to say, it's going to be an arduous journey, and that's exactly what Nintendo had in mind. As we discussed when talking about the original Zelda, NES cartridges didn't contain much memory. Consequently, they couldn't implement complex characters or story to control the flow of the game. But even then, the game itself couldn't be very long. Unless the player really enjoyed going over the same 8 or so short levels again and again, there really wouldn't be much replay value to the game, and players would very quickly get bored of both the game and the system. To solve this dilemma, game designers in the early years focused on making games last. Not by character and story, but by making the games as difficult as possible. The NES library is full of games that are famous for being some of the most challenging titles ever created. With each game, hours would be spent, not just on the game, but on one certain part of the game, playing the same segment over and over until you were finally able to figure out how the enemies moved or how to get to where you wanted to go. That process, repeated multiple times per game, made each game last several times longer than it otherwise would. The original Legend of Zelda was no different. Learning all about Hyrule and gaining enough skill to defeat the monsters that inhabit it is no small feat, and it takes a great deal of time. Once you get over the shock of what you have to do, however, all it really requires is patience, minus a few hectic rooms and bosses. But when it came time for the adventure of Link, it was decided that the difficulty setting would be turned all the way up. The game cartridge and title screen are decorated solely by a sword for good reason. More than any other game in the series, your life in this game is dependent on how well you can use your sword in combat. Up close, no holds barred, one wrong move can be the end of you, combat. The first random battles are fairly simple, tiny blobs and bats to get you used to timing and the experience point system. Another thing never seen again in Zelda. Once you get to the first palace and the first actual enemies, however, it's quite clear you're going to have to work hard to get anywhere in this game. While The Legend of Zelda had you working more defensively and strategically, the adventure of Link forces you to rush in and power your way through enemies, overcoming their defenses with your own quick movements and relentless attack. Utilizing your shield and finding weak points do play an integral part in the fight, but you have to figure it out fast, because one wrong move can very easily be your last. Your last. Death is so commonplace in this game, it's infuriating. Unless and until you get to the point where you actually know how you and your enemies work, you can expect to die in the same areas, from the same enemies, over and over and over again. It can take several tries to deal with one room or one enemy, and that doesn't necessarily guarantee that you'll know how to deal with them the next time they come along. What's more, the enemies don't just increase in defense as the game goes on, requiring more hits to be taken down, but they can vary in their attack styles, forcing you to adapt at a moment's notice. Sometimes the game is just cheap, making you very glad that this is the only game where a fall results in a one-hit kill. On a personal note, I remember playing this game for the first time when I was about 5. The game was so difficult, the enemies so unrelenting, and my skill level so poor, that I barely got past the first palace. When I revisited Death Mountain, which instead of a dungeon was now a labyrinth of caves full of baddies new and old, I simply could not handle the difficulty, no matter how many times I tried, in tearful frustration. Although I was also unsuccessful at the original Zelda at the time, and I have failed to beat other games, this is the only one where I can truly say I rage quit. It would be 10 years before I finally corrected my failure and conquered this game without any cheating. With all of this anger and frustration, it's hard to see how the adventure of Link really contributes to the Zelda franchise. I mean, it's just so weird and different from all of the others. A second look, however, reveals a new dimension to how you interact with your world, and you don't have to go far into the game to find it. A short ways down the road from your starting point is a little cluster of houses. When you enter, you find the first of several villages you will visit on your quest. For the first time, you see actual citizens of Hyrule living in something more than just a dank cave. What's more, despite having only a handful of things to say, these people give you a sense that they are actually living their lives. People are constantly moving in one direction or the other. Some people have helpful advice or suggestions, while some don't have anything useful to say at all. You can usually find people willing to help you out of the goodness of their hearts, refilling your health or magic. Others still have problems that you can help solve. While it amounts to simply retrieving certain items, this is the first time where you truly have a set of side quests for us to tackle, the reward for which is almost always access to a sage who grants you a magic spell. These interactions are designed to drive home the game's main objective. In the original game, your goal is to defeat Ganon, save Zelda, and thereby save Hyrule. Since there is once again a princess by the name of Zelda in need of saving, we automatically assume that that is once again our main goal. But it isn't. The narrative in the manual opens by discussing the terror the people of Hyrule are facing from trying to rebuild despite the constant threat of Ganon's survivors. What Link is searching for is a way to help bring further peace to Hyrule. The sleeping Princess Zelda was cursed because she held information regarding the Triforce of Courage, something that can accomplish the very goal Link has. Zelda's revival at the end of the game is only a symbol, showing that Link had truly united and mastered the use of the Triforce. And when she thanks him, it isn't for waking her up, it's for saving Hyrule. I will still take the thank you kiss though. It is very appropriate that this game is called The Adventure of Link, because it's Link's quest to save not just a princess, but an entire nation. That adventure, presented in a way unlike any other title in the franchise, paved the way for Link to be the warrior he is today. While the original focused on the exploration and the puzzles, the sequel focused on the way a battle is fought. Each type of enemy is unique, with its own style of combat and weak points to exploit. Some enemies take more time to master than others, while some you learn to simply avoid at all costs. Sometimes it's just the location of the sword strike, while others need just a blast of magic to turn the tide. Despite having to force your way through your opponents, those who master this game learn that a different kind of patience is necessary to defeat enemies. Nowhere is this better shown than in the final palace in Death Valley. After exploring a mammoth dungeon, you are faced with a gigantic creature launching an endless volley of fire. After exposing its weak point, it's a game of both patience and aggression, constantly moving and dodging the fire while calmly awaiting your opportunity to strike. After claiming victory, one last challenge is presented to see if you've truly learned, by defeating yourself via the first appearance of Shadow Link. Charging head-on as you've done so much in this game quickly leads to your death. With little life to spare, the only thing you can do is cast aside that hostility, sit in the corner, and let your darker side's aggression be his own undoing. That is the kind of fighter Link is. With every monster and every villain Link has come up against, there has always been a certain way to defeat it. The hero of Hyrule is a master strategist and has been able to identify weak points in every foe he has faced, utilizing magic, items, and his sheer determination. That skill and patience came from here. Learning to fight in the most trying of circumstances gave Link, and through him, us, the skill to face any foe, no matter the size, speed, or ability. Without the adventure of Link, we would never have the multiplicity of enemies and larger-than-life bosses that stand side by side with the puzzles to make The Legend of Zelda the epic quests that they are. If you compare the original Zelda to The Adventure of Link, it's very easy to tell which is the more definitive Zelda title. From the music, to the overall themes, to the way the adventure is viewed and explored. The first Zelda holds the primary pattern of the games that follow. With only a few exceptions, very little of what is visibly unique about The Adventure of Link can be seen in the later installments. But the overall feel of the later games have perfectly blended what both of these games brought to the table. Instead of games focused on exploration or games based on action, The Legend of Zelda became a fusion of both, giving us a realistic world and a hero truly capable of facing anything. The Legend of Zelda gave us an adventurer who will explore and discover, while The Adventure of Link gave us a warrior who will defend and conquer. These two games, brought together, gave us the framework of what the Legend of Zelda franchise would be, a combination of intricate puzzle solving and exploration, and a hero willing to stand against overwhelming odds to save the land, its people, and the princess who cares for them. Thank you everyone for coming along with me on The Adventure of Link. Like I said, this is easily the most difficult title in the franchise, so please leave a comment about your struggles and successes in this game. Beating this game is a badge of honor, so please stand up and be recognized. If you want to see me struggle through this game, you can check out my playthrough in the description below. And if you haven't seen my tribute for the original Legend of Zelda, you can find a link down there as well. We're well on our way through the Zelda universe now. Please subscribe and you'll know when the next installment is up and running. Join me next time as we leave the NES behind and explore Hyrule in a whole new way in The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. See you next time.